Ayrton Senna was Formula One's most revered champion, a three-time world title holder from Brazil, whose supernatural car control and fierce determination had made him a global icon. On May 1st, 1994, the 34-year-old was leading the San Marino Grand Prix at Italy's Imola circuit. He was driving the Williams FW16, a car that had been problematic throughout the race weekend. The atmosphere at Imola was already tense. Just one day earlier, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger had been killed during qualifying. Senna himself had been deeply affected, even considering not racing. At 2:17 p.m., Senna's blue and white car approached the high-speed Tamburello corner for the 7th time, traveling at approximately 190 miles per hour. What happened next occurred in mere seconds, but would be analyzed for decades. The Williams suddenly veered off the racing line. Telemetry later showed Senna had tried to slow the car from 190 miles per hour to 130 miles per hour, but his trajectory was unchangeable. The car left the track and struck a concrete barrier at an angle. The right front wheel assembly detached on impact and was driven back into the cockpit. The suspension arm pierced Senna's helmet, causing catastrophic trauma to his temporal region and frontal lobe. A piece of suspension also penetrated his visor, causing fatal cranial injuries. Blood poured from his helmet as medical director Sid Watkins arrived at the scene within seconds. Though unconscious, Senna was still alive, taking shallow breaths as medical crews worked frantically to stabilize him. The helicopter evacuation was swift, but the damage was irreversible. At Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, doctors discovered massive brain hemorrhaging. Despite emergency surgery, blood transfusions, and the efforts of Italy's top neurosurgeons, Senna's brain activity steadily declined. At 6:40 p.m., Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead. His heart had continued beating long after his brain was beyond saving. News of his death sent Brazil into national mourning, with his home country declaring 3 days of official grief for their fallen hero, Jim Clark. Jim Clark was considered the greatest racing driver of his generation, a two-time Formula One world champion whose smooth, effortless style made the impossible look easy. On April 7, 1968, the 32-year-old Scotsman was competing in a relatively minor Formula 2 race at Germany's Hockenheim circuit. He had nothing to prove. Clark already held the record for Grand Prix victories and was at the height of his fame. The conditions at Hockenheim that day were miserable. Rain fell steadily, creating treacherous sections of standing water around the high-speed forest circuit. Clark was driving his green and yellow Lotus 48, a car he hadn't raced before. On the fifth lap, as he approached the fast walled curve section at approximately 150 miles per hour, something went catastrophically wrong. Witnesses saw Clark's Lotus suddenly veer left without any apparent attempt to correct. The car left the track at full racing speed, traveled across a grass verge, and slammed directly into a stand of trees bordering the circuit. The impact was so violent that the lightweight car disintegrated. The monocoque chassis that was supposed to protect Clark was torn apart as if made of paper. Clark sustained multiple fatal injuries in the impact. His neck was broken, his skull fractured, and his chest crushed. The official cause of death would later be recorded as a broken neck, but the trauma was so extensive that any one of several injuries would have been fatal. Though a doctor reached the scene quickly, there was nothing to be done. Jim Clark had died instantly. News of Clark's death stunned the racing community. Fellow driver Graham Hill later said it was like turning off the sun. If Clark could be killed, a driver whose precision and skill seemed to make him untouchable, then anyone could. His body was returned to Scotland for a quiet funeral, attended by family and close friends. The sport's greatest driver was gone in an instant. In a minor race few would have remembered had it not claimed the life of a legend whose talent seemed limitless. Greg Moore. Greg Moore was North American racing's brightest young talent, a 24-year-old Canadian whose dazzling speed and charismatic personality had made him the future of the sport. On October 31st, 1999, he was competing in the kart season finale at California Speedway. He wasn't supposed to be racing at all that day. He had suffered a hand injury in a scooter accident the previous morning. Doctors had cleared him to compete with a specially padded glove. The race began under perfect blue skies, with Moore starting from the back of the grid. On lap 10, as his blue and white player's racing machine exited turn 2 at over 200 miles per hour, disaster struck. His car drifted wide onto a section of track where morning moisture still lingered. The cold tires lost all grip. Moore was merely a passenger as his car slid toward the infield grass at frightening speed. What followed shocked even veteran observers of the dangerous open-wheel series. His car skipped across the grass, seemingly gathering speed rather than slowing. When it reached the inside concrete wall, it struck at nearly perpendicular angle. The impact was so violent that the car was torn in half. Moore's unprotected head struck the concrete before his body was flung from the disintegrating chassis, tumbling grotesquely across the infield. Medical teams reached him within seconds, but what they found was catastrophic. Moore had suffered massive head and internal injuries. His brain was hemorrhaging severely, and multiple bones throughout his body were shattered. Despite immediate resuscitation attempts at the scene, Moore's injuries were unsurvivable. His heart was still beating as the medical helicopter lifted off, but his brain was already showing no activity. At Loma Linda University Medical Center, doctors fought a losing battle. The official announcement came just hours after the crash. Greg Moore had died from massive head and internal injuries. The racing world was left to contemplate what might have been. Just one day after his death, he was supposed to begin testing with Team Penske, the most prestigious team in American racing. Instead, his father was making funeral arrangements for a son whose potential would never be realized.